All right, welcome back to the Run Through Trails podcast. Today we're back for episode number 17, and we've got another athlete spotlight episode for you. We're joined by Chelsea Creak. Chelsea's an elite trail team member and a Salomon UK athlete. Me and Chelsea bumped into each other actually at a run group in Girona about a week ago and got hooked up that way. But I know we've got some other ties to Chelsea through the elite trail team and through Doug and Lewis knowing each other, and obviously teaming with Chris, who we've had on as a previous guest. So yeah, welcome Chelsea. Great to have you.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, so happy to be here with you guys and to meet you, Lewis, as well, and James, to meet you again after our brief encounter in Girona.
Yeah, perfect. And as always, joined by Lewis Moses, NLC founder and Run Through Trails co-host. I mean, that's got to be the second most famous thing that you've ever done, right?
It's getting right to the top. It's getting more popular, this podcast. I keep bumping into people who say, I heard you on the podcast. I'm like, oh yeah, the new levels coach one. They say, no, the Run Through Trails one. I'm like, oh, come on.
Nice.
James is outdoing me here, but no, it's great. And it's good to be back. And yeah, welcome Chelsea. I obviously know about you from through connections. And then James mentioned that he'd bumped into you in Girona, which I was very jealous about, by the way, when you were getting photos from a nice sunny place and you tell me you've been out there for like 6 weeks. So very jealous.
Yeah.
So welcome back to the cold.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a bit of a shock to the system. The lack of sunshine, I think, is the hardest part.
So, I mean, we've just said that we just met in Girona, but now you're obviously back in the UK, Chelsea. What did your kind of trip look like? How long have you been out there for? When did you get back?
Yeah, so I headed out to Girona just after Christmas. So I started my journey on the 27th and arrived just in time for New Year's in Girona, which was perfect. I did this sort of a similar trip last year as well. I was between jobs at the time, so it was great. It was a full holiday for 6 weeks in Girona and just enjoying the sunshine and getting some like solid training in. And then as it came around to the end of 2024, I thought, I don't really think I can cope with another dark, wet, muddy January in the UK. So decided to do the trip again and it just gave me some time to get some like really solid training in, not having to worry about like muddy trails, wet trails. You could just go out onto the hills quite easily from Girona and just there are lots of other runners around and it's great to be able to do some sociable running as well. So it's been a really good few weeks of solid traiing. So
nice, amazing. Yeah, it's such a good spot. It's one of those weird hubs for outdoor sport where people just kind of all seem to gather, because I was out essentially having a load of meetings around the event that we're putting on there in May. So meeting up with Christian, meeting up with the guys at Chance Running, meeting with Alesh to talk about the Fuel Plus stuff, and just kind of joining a few running clubs, and that's where we bumped into each other. But those guys were saying, oh yeah, the Overland Running group, it's a really local group, and everyone's like English, Australian, German. I was like, not really local, are they? They're like, oh no, but like local for Girona means all expats. So it's like a weird mix, isn't it? Because it's there's just this hub of international athletes who go there to train all the time for the reasons you've just listed.
Yeah, and it's amazing. And you turn up at these runs and then half of them are pro or ex-pro cyclists or triathletes and things. It's just really interesting to learn everybody's stories as well at these social runs that they hold there. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, I had the same experience. I went out and we just ran easy while those guys did their, I think it's like the Tuesday morning session, and I was jogging with two guys, one Finnish guy and an English lad, and we got chatting, and he was a pro cyclist and the other guy had run like 2:29 for a marathon, and they were just like the random guys jogging in the group. So it's definitely a cool little scene. But I suppose before we get into that stuff, let's go kind of back to the start, and would you mind give us a bit of background about yourself, like how you kind of found your way into running, any sports that you did in the past, like what was your route into trail running?
Yep. So I actually got into running very late in life for most people. So I didn't even sign up for my first race, and I didn't actually sign up for it. My husband signed me up for it until I was 26. But before that, so as a child, I was always sort of really outdoorsy, loved horses. I spent all of my time outside of school riding, mucking out, working at the yard. I kind of was naturally sort of, I guess, quite good at running at school in comparison to my peers, but I had no interest in doing it outside of school unless I kind of had to for like school sports days or a PE and things. And then went to university here in Bristol and I knew that I couldn't bring my horse with me, so I was looking for another sport to be able to take over that amount of time. And I remember it was the 2008 Olympics, the summer before I started university, and my mum and I were watching, and we were watching the rowing, and I was like, oh, this looks really interesting, and I'm really tall, so I was like, oh, this could be a sport that I could be good at. So I just found myself joining the rowing team in my first year, and I rowed at Bristol for my entire university time there, and it was fantastic. It took up just as much time as horses. I think I was doing about 12 sessions a week, so it was quite intense. But also we had a really successful crew, and we did races like one at Bucks and Women's Henley and things like that.
Oh, cool.
But then rowing is kind of a very intense sport. And I think outside of sort of the university structure, it's a little bit more tricky. There's a lot of faff involved in rowing as well. So I went back to horse riding for a bit, and then kind of looking for sports that maybe weren't quite going to sort of require 7 other people in a boat to all meet at the same time and things. And I kind of got back into running sort of outside of school, and my husband had raced this race called Man versus Horse, and he was like, we should do it together the following year. So he signed me up, and I absolutely loved it and fell in love with running. And that's kind of where it started, really.
Amazing. Yeah, that's a great story. I thought for one point there, Chelsea, you were going to say man versus horse. It meant your husband versus you on the horse, but then obviously he's roped you in the running side of it. I can definitely relate to the mucking out as well. The first time I got roped into mucking out was with Gemma's sister Kirsty was away, and she had a horse called Theakston, and Gemma said, oh, we're going to go and muck Theakston out, and I was like, what's mucking out mean? And it's not a pretty job, is it?
No, it's not.
So,
as well.
But then I watched your finals race this year, and the Golden Trail Series final, and that's kind of the opposite of mucking out, is mucking in, because that seemed very, brutal, but very muddy. So you've traded the mucking out with the mucking in, and it's quite interesting because there is some crossover, obviously, with I guess the aerobic element of rowing as well. Do you feel like that's helped you with the transition to rowing, to running, that rowing background and that development with particularly that aerobic capacity and things such as that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really, really helped a lot, and I think also just that discipline as well in terms of training. It's quite intense, and just 2 sessions a day and kind of being able to cope with that mentally as well has helped later on with running too.
Nice. Yeah, amazing.
Cool. So how old were you when you did the Man versus Horse race? You said that was kind of right out of university, or early 20s?
So I was 26 then.
Right, okay, cool. So how long were you running for until you started to have some I almost said respectable. I mean, always also respectable, but like some kind of pointers that you might have a bit of talent and you might be able to succeed and actually compete at the front of races?
So I didn't really start to take my running seriously until I think it was just the beginning of 2020, which was when I signed up with my coach, Doug.
Oh, cool.
And then I did a few races. Obviously, it was COVID, which was unfortunate. So the races were kind of like time trials. But I had a couple of races in the UK that I did. I think they were part of the Maverick race series, and I ended up coming first overall. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe I can be competitive in some of these other races in the UK as well, and just try and give it a shot and see what happens.
What kind of format were those races? Were they shorter distance stuff similar to what you kind of trend towards now? Were they like marathon distance?
So the first couple were sort of half marathon. I think one of them might have been about 16k, then a half marathon, and then I also did a couple that then had a master that were marathon distance as well, where I was in I think I was second overall, not overall in the women's category for that one, but yeah.
Bit of a correlation there as well with the kind of the Maverick series, and then obviously you got into the UK Golden Trail series as well, which we'll touch on in a while, Chelsea. But yeah, it's kind of that that nice element of going to a number of races and collating points and then being rewarded for those points is quite a nice way of doing it. But I'm intrigued with that relationship with Doug, because obviously the Elite Trail team is quite new. I remember when Doug set that up, but in 2020, I assume was that through Doug's coaching business that you first met him?
Yeah, so that was through TMR coaching. I think I'd done a race in France and I had come 11th female and was like, I really want to be able to make it into like the top 10, but I had no idea what I was doing. I think I ran a marathon it was about 2,000 meters of climbing. And I think at home I'd been training, maybe just doing like 10K or something. So I really needed a lot of help to come up with a training plan. And I reached out on Facebook to one of the running groups just asking for coach suggestions, and Doug's name came up and we met, and I've been working with him ever since.
Nice. It is funny how these things come about, though, because I think people see athletes like you competing at the front of races, sponsored, traveling around the world, doing all this cool stuff, and think, oh, these people have been, running forever, part of running groups, like they know the ins and outs of it, they're tied in with all these networks and connections. But it was a recommendation to a Facebook group to a coach who then happened to kind of lead you down this path. So it's cool. I mean, mine's very much the same as like a mate said, oh, you should speak to Lewis. And then things just kind of develop. So yeah, no, that's interesting. So what would you say was your first like big result? What's the first moment where you crossed the finish line and thought, okay, that was a serious win?
Yeah, I think that would be probably Trail Marathon Wales, which was part of the Golden Trail National Series. I think that was 20. Gosh,
is that Cody Brennan, the one out towards Barmouth?
Yes, 2022, I think was the year. And yeah, I was first female, and that was just, it felt incredible. It has the race had such a great atmosphere as well, and you sort of come into this like amphitheater kind of environment, and so many people cheering, and yeah, it was just brilliant. And it was part of the Golden Trail National Series, and that was the first one where I was like, oh, this is amazing.
Nice. Yeah, we were there in 2023. I won the half. I don't think we crossed paths though. Yeah.
I did it again in 2023 as well, and I won the marathon then as well.
Nice. Oh, my dad DNF'd that, so.
Oh no!
We'll drop that in because I know he's probably going to listen. But yeah, no, cool race. I never saw the second half of the marathon route, obviously, because you follow the exact same loop, don't you, for the half, and then you come through that split near the event village and then do another lap. Was the second half of the route is it similar terrain and stuff to the first half?
Similar. There's quite a bit of climbing still to go in that second half. But yeah, all like nice fire tracks, and yeah, it can be pretty fast course as well, so that was really cool.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how the world connects. We were all in the same place at the same time, and it's funny because that was like a breakthrough race for you in 2022. It was actually where James probably wouldn't say it was a breakthrough race. He actually did a session the day before on the road. He was training for a marathon, and then his dad was doing the marathon, as he mentioned, and he had a spot in the half along with Gemma, and he decided to run it in a pair of Adidas Sens, which is a road shoe, which you can testify to, Chelsea. It's still not the easiest of courses, that course. And we set off together, just jogging along, and said, yeah, I feel pretty good. And I said, okay, well, you can do this as a progression run then and just see how you feel. And then he progressed and went to the front. And I just said to him at the end of the race, like, maybe you should think about trail running, James, because that was pretty ridiculous. And
that was the one where we literally had that chat of like, you know what, let's maybe not bother with marathons and try some trail races. Yeah, cool. I mean, I really enjoyed that event. That was obviously, Salomon were really heavily involved. I guess I don't know if they've always partnered with that event, but obviously they're engaged with the Golden Trail stuff, or were at the time.
Yes.
Yeah. So did you go to that race with a goal of like gaining points in that series, or did you just do that? Yeah, you were. Okay.
Yeah, cool. So I went into that race. So at the beginning of 2022, Doug and I sat down and were like, what do I want to aim for this year? And I was like, I want to see how I can compete against the other women in the UK. So we're like, let's have a look at a race series, and the Golden Trail National Series was running. So yeah, I just wanted to see how many points I could get. If my sort of A goal was to try and get into the UK final for that year.
Yeah, it's just for the audience, because they might not necessarily know what the score is with that. I mean, it's funny because I had a chat with Christian when I was in Girona, and one of the first things we started talking about was how disjointed the trail running world is in terms of like all of these series and Sky running, UTMB, there's world champs, there's Europeans. It's hard to really get your head around where the racing is. Can you give us like a super brief overview of what the Golden Trail National Series was and what that led into and like why it was appealing to you?
Yeah, so the Golden Trail series, I mean, it has morphed over the last few years. But when I first started in 2023, they had national series that they ran sort of across the globe. Most of the national series were run in Europe, but there was one in the US and then a couple of in Asia, aimed at trail running rather than sort of sky races, because you've got sky running. And at that time, it was kind of the shorter side. So it was between half marathon and like 50k races. In the UK, it was kind of heavily towards the marathon to 50k. So you had Trail Marathon Wales, which was marathon, then you had Serpent Trail 50k, Scafell Pike Marathon, and then the final being Ring of Steel in Scotland. And you could collect points at each race. So based on your position, you collected a number of points. And then they added up, I think it was your best 2 out of the races were your score that you got through into the final if you're in the top 5, and then your score from the final was worth double, and then you could get into the Golden Trail World Series final. So then be able to compete against the top runners in the world and also the other nations as well.
Yeah, I really like the concept. James and I talk about it a lot, and we like that feel of aiming towards something, and it almost maps your year out for you, doesn't it, in a way?
Yeah.
Like as a coach, Chelsea, I'm quite familiar with that. In the trail running world, it does usually fall kind of around sort of December, January time, where we sit down and say, right, what would you like to go to this year? What's the big A goals? And that series itself lends itself quite nicely to the calendar, particularly in the UK, because you can start a little bit earlier. You can get onto some short, snappy trail races that are quite punchy, and then it kind of all accumulates later on in the year and finishes at a really big event somewhere else. So I obviously watched your progress this year because I was chatting to Doug and obviously knew you were competing in the finals. Did you make the finals in 2022 as well, or was it just 2023 where you went and represented the UK, or was it both?
So 2022, I had a really successful time in the qualifying races. So I won at Trail Marathon Wales, I won at Serpent Trail 50k, and then I came, I think, 5th in Scafell Pike Marathon, because that was also GB Trials at the time. And so it was your top 2 races. So I automatically qualified in the best position that I could be in for the final. Amazing. However, unfortunately, the week before the final were the Sky Running World Championships, and I had been selected to go to those. So I went off thinking I'd race both the Sky Running World Championships and then try and recover as much as I could in that week to then be able to race at Ring of Steel, because really all I needed to do was complete the race, and then I could get my ticket to, I think at the time it was Madeira, where the Golden Trail World Finals were going to be. But I had a bit of an accident at the Sky Running World Championships and badly damaged my ankle, which meant I was then out of running for the next few months. So there was no Golden Trail UK final or world final for me in 2022, which was a bit gutting.
Oh, no. So you were doing the Sky Running World Series and also the Golden Trail UK stuff. And it's interesting because when I think Golden Trail, the big, I guess, World Series events, I think they call them. Yeah, I think like pretty aggressive, big elevation, pretty short, pretty fast, very technical, all the stuff that you see on TV following that elite series. But then the races you've described in the UK are more, I mean, the UK is anyway, but especially Serpent Trail and Trail Marathon Wales are like way more just rolling, like almost road shoe races. Obviously, Ring of Steel is a different thing, is a lot more technical. It's weird how they mix those two things, but as you were doing those simultaneously, were you finding that you particularly enjoyed a certain style of terrain and a length of race, or that you were particularly like stronger at the runnable or the technical?
I would say that my sort of type of running is definitely more the runnable trails. I'm a fast runner over runnable trails. So like things like Trail Marathon Wales and Serpent Trail, I was very well suited to. Sky running stuff. So at the time they were sort of asking for people to put their names forward if they wanted to do the Sky Running World Champs and then selecting people. And I had done Sky Race to Matizan before, and I really enjoyed it, but I'm just not the best technical runner. So I put myself forward, I went and did it, but I would definitely say I'm more of a trail runner than a sky runner. Ring of Steel, it was interesting to go from doing sort of in 2023 I did Trail Marathon Wales again, the Serpent Trail, and then went and did Ring of Steel, and they're just so different. Ring of
It's not
Steel
the same sport.
But this isn't what I've been doing for the rest of the year. But yeah, interesting to mix it up as well.
So I'm going to put my coach's hat on here then and say they are, like James highlighted there, they're pretty much different sports. And anybody who tried sky running or has watched the videos on YouTube, which are often the best videos, by the way, they show quite how extreme they can be. And you do find that people have a specific skill on those courses as well. The people who come to the forefront of those races, they have to have either lived in the mountains or have a certain level of technical ability, not just on the descending either, to climb at the speed they climb at. But I'm intrigued, like I say, from a coaching perspective here, Chelsea, is did you feel like by doing that and committing to that series, it was going to help you long term with the technicality of trail running, so that when you did come to races like you did this year in Locarno, you then have benefited from being in those sky running races?
Yeah, I definitely think, just using the Sky Race in Scotland, so like Ring of Steel, just sort of forcing myself to do something that I feel a little is like out of my comfort zone definitely helps, because then you get onto the trails that are still technical, but they're not as technical, or like things like I've seen at Sky Race to Matizan, where you've got suddenly like a cliff and there's just nothing there. They put like a little bit of string to make sure that you stay away from it. But like then when I'm faced with other situations which maybe I wouldn't feel comfortable in normally, because I've done that, I'm like, actually this is fine, because I've done other things that have scared me a lot more. So yeah, I definitely think it helps. And I think also just being in an environment where you've got other people around you who are really good at sky running, and that helps too. You can kind of watch what they're doing, and I think sometimes when you're following someone on a descent, they're getting the really good lines, so you can kind of like try and follow a little bit and learn from them as well.
Yeah, 100%. It makes sense. Like upskill in the weak areas and double down on what you're stronger at, which I mean then kind of leads into early 2024, where you had a good place in at the Chianti Marathon, which, back to the runnable stuff, I'm interested to hear a little bit about that race, but I know that Lewis is as well firsthand in terms of like from an elite female perspective. I know Gemma's doing the longer one, but yeah, how did you find Chianti? I take it that kind of suited you.
Yes, yeah. So I signed up for Chianti because I was really looking to try and get a direct qualification into the OCC. It's a race that I've really wanted to do ever since I sort of started with Doug. And obviously it becomes more challenging because they keep changing the rules, and it's just getting more and more competitive to get in. So I was like, a direct entry would be like ideal. So I signed up for it. It was kind of framed as being, I think it's got about 1,600 meters of climbing in the marathon. So I was like, this is perfect, runnable trails. But it ended up being a very competitive race. I think like there were at least 20 elite female runners down to be running it. So I did go in a bit sort of a little bit scared. But yeah, it's in such a beautiful place. Rada in Chianti was just absolutely gorgeous. It did end up being a very runnable race. You've got, I think, the first 10K of the race are downhill. So it was an extremely fast start to the race. And then it's kind of more undulating with the climbs and things. But yeah, really interesting. And to go through all the vineyards, it was beautiful. I remember going through the last aid station, and we'd caught up with some of the runners who were doing the ultras, and they were stopping and having wine and cheese and things. So nice.
Sounds like that.
Later. Yeah.
I'm not a big wine fan, but I'm a huge cheese fan. So
Yeah.
I'm starting to regret not entering now. I might just go to the aid stations at Crewin and just took myself into the cheese. But yeah, I'm really interested about this, Chelsea. Obviously, from a selfish point of view, because I've not been out there yet and I've not seen it. But you can analyze GPX files all you want. You don't really get a true picture till you're there. I will go out early and I will run part of the course and try and get a feel for it. But from what I gather, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, is sometimes people look at those runnable trail races where I see Chianti as it's got some short, punchy climbs. There's nothing really exceeding sort of 100, 150 meters, but they look quite steep. They are a lot more runnable. There's a lot of descending, as you've quite rightly pointed out as well. And people look at that and sometimes think, oh, well, that's going to be easier then, because, it's not the technicality of, say, an OCC in Chamonix where you've got 3,300 meters and hour-long climbs thrown in there. But the muscular demand of running faster and having to commit to that faster pace sometimes is just as hard, if not harder, isn't it?
Yeah.
Especially when the field's stacked, which Chianti is becoming more and more stacked as it goes.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Like, just because then it's more about the pace, and you're having to hit, your pace targets, and running fast for like 3-4 hours is really hard. And I think one of the key things at that race was making sure I didn't go too hard in the first 10K, because it's downhill and you don't want to completely ruin your quads for the rest of the race. You have to still be able to run the next like 33K. So I definitely agree. It's just as hard. It's just a different type of hard to the technical races.
Yeah, that's some really good insights there. And you've kind of, I guess, sung to my tune here as a coach, because I'll be very much saying that to the athletes who I work with is do not get sucked into going too hard, because people see it sometimes as like time in the bank, and I just see it the complete opposite. I think you're just spending too much energy. And if you spend too much energy, whether that's, energy aerobically or whether it's that muscular energy, that you're going to go and have to pay it back and some in the second half. And if you've got no strength left in those quads because the damage has been done in the first 10K, you're going to be in big trouble. And from what I can see, there's actually some quite tough sections in the second half, certainly in Gemma's race. And I think it's quite similar, isn't it, in the 50 as well. So you've got to have that energy, and you've got to have you've got to be able to switch those legs on still when those tough climbs come.
Yeah, and you've got to remember that there's an uphill finish as well, which
brutal.
Yeah, definitely brutal, with some stairs too. So
yeah. Oh, not stairs. Sick of stairs. What shoes did you wear for that, Chelsea? Obviously, I'm assuming all Salomon, right?
Yes.
What are your runnable Salomon shoes?
So I think back then I was wearing the Trail Pulsar Pros. So they have like a slight sort of rocker shape to them. And after my ankle injury at the Skyrunning World Champs, I was then actually struggling a bit with my right ankle, and they're just one shoe that really, really worked for me. So right. I wore them, I think, through all my races in 2023, and then also for the start of 2024, until I started wearing the Pulsar 3s. But yeah, they worked really well for me. So they don't have I didn't need a huge amount of tread on them. So the lugs weren't very deep, but just nice and smooth and bouncy and light were key for that race.
Yeah, nice. What's the difference between because I race in the Pulsar 3s. What's the difference between the S-Lab ones and the Trail Pulsar?
So for the S-Lab ones, so for the Pulsar 3s, they are definitely lighter. Okay. So that's the shoe that I've moved on to now, and then I raced all of the summer in them. I think they've got slightly deeper lug on them, and they're narrower as well. So it kind of depends a little bit on your foot shape. Whereas the Trail Pulsar Pros were slightly wider in the toes, so you can get a little bit more spread. Slightly, maybe a tiny bit more of that rocker shape as well, which was why I was feeling much more comfortable when coming back from injury.
Okay, cool. Because it's difficult. I feel like we don't need to talk about shoes for too long, but the Pulsar 3s are amazing for loads of different things. But to me, I don't know, it's like there may be a 3 to 4 hour race shoe depending on how hard the surface is. I used them in Annecy in June because it was really muddy, so you could run forever on mud because it's soft anyway. But for runnable like canyons, Chianti kind of thing, it's that thought of like, am I losing something here compared to the people who've got the plated super shoes, especially on those sorts of routes, you know, like the Hockers and the Adidas and whatever. Was there much single track in Chianti, or is it all like double wide fire road type stuff?
There's a little bit of single track, but yeah, a lot of it is the sort of the wider fire track type roads. But yeah, there are a few sort of shorter sections where it's single track. And I think part of like when you go down the descent, there's one point where it kind of funnels into a single track bit as well. So you need to make sure that you get into kind of a good spot where you're not sort of super crowded and going to get stuck behind other people if you want to run on. But then it widens out again. So you do have opportunities to be able to easily overtake. And from memory as well, there's some road section as well in the first 15k at least as well. So yeah, you're going to want something that you're going to feel comfortable in shoe-wise, not too harsh on the feet.
Yeah, it's a good point, isn't it? You've got to consider all that, the differences in terrain within the race as well, and pick a shoe that's going to suit. From a training perspective, Chelsea, and again, you know, going back to that forward planning as an athlete and a coach, would it be fair to say that Chianti was a bit of an A goal for that spring period for you to try and then qualify?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, Chianti was sort of my first A goal of that year of 2024. So it was quite nice to have it early in the season and to have something to sort of be prepping for. So I had my time out in Girona, so that was very much focused on Chianti, and then I came back to the UK and I spent a lot of time running like the Malverns, for instance, and trying to set the FKT there as like a training run for Chianti, because in terms of like sort of the elevation profile kind of works quite well in terms of Chianti as well, because you've got climbs that are maybe 100, 150, but nothing sort of bigger than that, and then it's
like that.
rolling.
Yeah, it's a good idea. And I think our audience who listen to this podcast, the majority of the audience who listen to this podcast could learn a lot from that. We talk a lot about kind of A goals, B goals and C goals as coaches and athletes. And I think this is where, you know, the elites get that right, and the masses can learn a lot, because a lot of people who come to us who are in that mass participation level, they often say, oh, you know, I'm just plateauing with my performance. I'm getting the same results time and time again. And the obvious thing is, when you look at their training, their races, is that they're just racing all the time and they don't actually identify where they want to peak. Whereas what's quite nice about this is you're saying, look, I went away on a training camp. I even had specific long runs in there that were targeted, that factored in the elevation and the profile, and I knew I needed to run fast on that type of terrain, and it was all geared towards this one race. It's not to say that that's your only race in the calendar, because it won't have been, but I think it demonstrates that quite nicely, that it's important to identify those races. So you identified some training demands there and how you trained a little bit for Chianti. Was there anything in there specifically that you focused on as well, where you looked at that course and thought, I need to either get better at this, or this is one of my strengths? Like James said, I'm going to double down on that. How did that training look, and how did you and Doug go about that?
So for Chianti, it was definitely more about sort of working on that speed and speed endurance as well, because yeah, it was going to be a much more runnable race, which does suit me. So a lot of the time that I spent in Girona as well involved a lot of speed work and a lot of sort of doing sort of zone 2, zone 3s as well, over like sort of an hour and a half period of time, just to sort of pick that up too. But yeah, and then when I came back, it was then trying to move on to sort of the hills and just make sure that I could carry that speed along too. And yeah, so then trying to do the Malvern Ridge line as fast as I could ended up being a really good training run to sort of just see how all of that had added up and yeah, what might happen at Chianti.
Nice. And then the remainder of last year of 2024 was kind of focused on Golden Trail races. I know you were at Marathon Mont Blanc, and yes. I know you were in Locarno. What else did you do last year?
Yeah, so then sort of my second A goal of the year, which I kind of set myself quite a strong goal, with trying to get into the top 30 overall in the Golden Trail World Series after the final. So I targeted Marathon de Mont Blanc, Sierre Zinal, and then 2 in the US. So I did Headlands and then Mammoth Lakes. And then I did some of the Golden Trail UK races as well, but like we were saying, they weren't A goal races, so I was just using those as sort of good training opportunities. They were half marathons as well, so kind of similar distance to some of the Golden Trail World Series races, and just an opportunity to really sort of push myself hard. Because it's sometimes, you're out on a training run and you're alone, it's difficult to really push yourself as much, but then you've got other people around, it's a little bit easier. So yeah, it was a busy 2024.
Nice. Yeah, it's difficult with the training thing, isn't it? We chat about that all the time, how there's a strong UK trail running scene, but everyone's so spread out that it's not like you've got groups that you can train with at your level, local to you. So it's same with me. I end up doing a lot of solo training, and then we'll dot in the odd race or maybe a trip somewhere to try and get a bit more intensity in. Or to try and find a group to run with. But any major highlights? I mean, you've listed off some pretty big profile races there, like Marathon de Mont Blanc's one that's been on my radar for a while, looks incredible. CSNL, obviously, probably like biggest race of the year, unless you're into 100 milers, but any standouts, or even the US ones, how they compared?
They were all standouts. They were all all so different, which was incredible. And just the level of competition was just amazing. It was just amazing to be part of, to be on like a start line, and there are like 40 elite women around you, and you had sort of like, especially for like Marathon de Mont Blanc and Headlands, and even Mammoth Lakes, actually, they had specific women's elite start lines, which was just incredible. Wow. And you had all the cameras and film crews, which was really cool. I would say Marathon de Mont Blanc was one that I was really, really, really excited for. I felt like it was a race that I would be quite well suited to. Unfortunately, I had COVID for the 2 weeks before, so I felt terrible during the race, but I still think it would be a race that I'd like to target again. So I've signed up for that again for this year. It was basically a bit of a mixed season, really, with the Golden Trail World Series for me. I learned a lot about myself, I think. So I really enjoyed the marathon distance. I then went to CSNL, and obviously it's a very different race. There's a lot of climbing, but then there's also a lot of descent. So it was, I think it was about 32 degrees as well, because the race starts at 11 a.m.
Yeah, it's brutal.
Altitude, and I unfortunately ended up DNFing, which was a little bit gutting. Luckily found a friend who was also struggling with me, so we walked back together. But up until that point, I was having a great time. But these things happen.
It's good. Do you know what? And it's not good to hear it, because, like you say, these things happen, and they're the disappointments we have in the sport. But I think it is good to recognise that. And you say, I've learned a lot about myself as well through those, because we often find out a lot more about ourselves on those days than on the days that go well. Because the days that go well, we just bounce away all happy Larry, like, that was amazing, I'm amazing, great, yeah, brilliant, everything's working, and we move on. But I'm intrigued, Chelsea, and if you don't mind sharing, what were some of those learnings for you personally that are going to help you now move forward?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things is preparing for altitude. As a sea level runner, it's always going to be very difficult. But you kind of don't realise how much altitude affects you until you go up and try and race. So both CSNL and then definitely Mammoth Lakes was tough, because Mammoth, you're starting at, I think it's about 2,500 metres, and then you're going up to 3,000, 400 metres. And like within the first 5 minutes, I was like, this doesn't feel like a race anymore, because I feel like I'm barely moving. I was following sort of a hot bath protocol and things, but I think I need to start that earlier and just be a bit more regimented about making sure that I'm doing it, and also getting out and spending time at altitude. If I want to race these races, I need to do that. And also just learning with the short races, it's just a very different way of going about racing them. So I've been kind of with the Trail Marathon Wales and Serpent Trail, they're all Marathon Plus, and you don't want to go out too hard at the start, because you want to hold on for that second half. But with these like shorter races, it's much more, you have to go hard from the start, otherwise you just lose everybody else, and that's what everybody's doing. And it's kind of just go out hard and hold on, because they're 26 kilometers. It's kind of a different race style from the marathon. And I think I've just learned that, that I'm much more suited to kind of that marathon distance, and that is the distance that I kind of want to target a bit more. But I've also really enjoyed doing these shorter ones just for just fun, just seeing how hard I can push myself.
Thanks for
Nice.
sharing that. No, amazing.
Yeah, cool. I mean, yeah, the elevation altitude at Mammoth that's ridiculous. And if you're not kind of there for a few weeks before to at least adapt, that's brutal.
Yeah, and it was tricky because we had a race. So we had Headlands the week before, and Headlands is in San Francisco, and it's basically at sea level. So
sea level, yeah.
You've only got 1 week then between the two races, and they're two very different races. So it was just really fun to get that variety, but yeah, tough for everybody to be able to prep for those as well.
Yeah.
With a short distance.
The timing of the races as well, like it's such a condensed period around there, because you've just got, I mean, obviously it's seasonal with trail running because a lot of it is in the mountains and it needs to be during the summer period. But I remember watching people like Judith Feeder being out at OCC, then she's in the US, then she's racing Headlands, then she's racing Mammoth, and it's like, oh my God, I can't even really imagine being able to string, respectable results together at all of those races, one after the other, because it is just relentless. And to be able to do that and maintain the training with the travel whilst avoiding injury and then also perform, it's a lot to ask. Like, those guys race a lot on that circuit. And you obviously had a busy year as well last year, so cool. No, it is interesting. So then off the back of that, I know we had a brief chat last week about your plans moving into 2025, but what does this year look like for you?
Yeah, so my A goal for 2025 is OCC.
Nice.
So yeah, it's a race that I've wanted to do for quite a while. I've been out to Chamonix when other people have been doing UTMB and crewed them, and I've just felt like, I really want to do this. So yeah, really looking forward to that, and that's what sort of everything is kind of targeted towards this year. I've also got Marathon de Mont Blanc, so I'm kind of using that as sort of training for OCC, just being in sort of Chamonix. It's not the same course, but some bits are similar. And again, I really enjoyed the course, even though I didn't feel great last year. So looking forward to giving that another go. And then also hoping to do something maybe a little bit longer, sort of after OCC. So hoping to do the Grand Templier, so about 80 kilometers as well. And then obviously I did finish in the top 30 just of the Golden Trail World Series. So I do get bibs to the Golden Trail World Series races this year. So I am hoping to do some of those, just trying to work out kind of the logistics and making sure that I don't overcommit to racing, because I think a little bit like you were saying, James, last year was a really busy year for me. And by the time I'd done the World Series final, I was exhausted and I was done. That was my biggest year of racing, and I think all the traveling just caught up with me, and I was just like, I need an off season.
But it's so hard because, you're clearly passionate about the sport, you're having success, so you want to go and take part in these races, then you have success, so it opens up opportunity, and you can't say no to these invites, right? As if you're not going to go and race in the US, and you're not going to go to Marathon de Mont Blanc, and you're not going to go and experience CSNL, but then that's a lot. So it's so difficult. It's so difficult. I did have one question related to the Locarno race, or when you start. Wait, which was your first kind of World Series Golden Trail race after doing the UK stuff? Which was the first?
So the first World Series. So I went to the final in 2023, and that was
the one in Finale in Italy.
Yeah, in Italy.
Okay, cool, nice. So that was going to be my question. You've had really strong results in the UK series, UK and Netherlands, or however they classify it.
Yeah.
Rocking up, probably feeling quite confident, but also a little bit terrified because it's another level of competition. And you're seeing faces who you probably watched the streams and been following the sport and stuff. What was that feeling like? And what was the main difference between the international World Series level race versus the kind of fields that you're running against in the UK races?
I mean, yeah, it was just so different to be surrounded by all of these amazing other runners, and all of these, just to have so many elite women all together was just incredible, because it is quite difficult, especially in the UK, to find races where you have sort of a deep women's field. other than having maybe 2 or 3 female runners. So it was just incredible. I feel like with the World Series final, there's a lot of adrenaline going around and everybody's very excited for the race. So it's quite difficult to go into the race and not get too overly excited and stressed about it and things, because everybody is. And I think one of the things I found that I struggled with is because I was staying with other runners who I didn't actually know, but who were also doing the World Series. And then you've got all these runners in a house together and nobody wants to switch off before the race. Everybody's just talking about the race. So yeah, there's just a lot going on. But it was a really cool experience. But yeah, it was tough as well. And with the World Series, you've got a prologue, which you run 2 days before the final. And that's just a killer because it's a time trial. And especially in 2024, it involved a ridiculous descent. So everybody's quads were just done by the final. But yeah, just a really cool experience.
It made for great social media content. I will give them that.
That's
Some of those videos of people sliding down the hill was, And what I loved is just the different techniques that people were using to get down it. It was fascinating. I mean, there's an element of that. I think it's a really good question from James, because there's an element of that where that's going to really help you when you get to OCC this year, because if we're honest, like these big finals that you've been to, Chelsea, and the OCC is also a big final. You know, it is the event where everybody comes together and everybody lines up on that day, and they do a big thing about the elite men and the elite women, and anybody and everybody is there who wants to be the best 50k runner in the world. But I feel like you're now a bit of a step ahead now because you've kind of experienced that already, which is great. But I'm also interested to know, are there learnings that you can take from the team as well? Because obviously Chris had a really good performance this year from the Elite Trail team. You know, he was six man across the line, and that's a huge performance. Yeah. Doug was out there as well, supporting a number of the athletes, you know, whether it was in the OCC, CCC or UTMB itself. He's also ran out there, which helps. Yeah. And I know you have a really good relationship with the Elite Trail team. You know, I see you meet on a regular basis on Zoom, and yeah, that's really cool. So I'm intrigued to know, like, will you use some of that knowledge from Chris and the team to really help you prep for this year?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one of the real highlights of being part of the team, is that we all share everything about our races, what goes well and what hasn't worked for us. So we have weekly sort of catch-up calls on a Monday to go through races and people's training plans. But it will be really interesting, and it's really useful for Doug as well, because he has all this training data for Chris and how his race went and things that can be also used to help inform my training for this year, and Chris also racing again. So and then just also things like nutrition and like where you can get water. So where are all the water stops outside of aid stations and things like that, which is really, really helpful. And just, we can walk each other through races that we've been through. So for instance, Poppy had done Arc of Attrition last year. So then she's just been sort of guiding everybody into everyone in the Elite Trail team who's doing Arc of Attrition this year as well. So that was really helpful. Doing that.
I heard there was a big debate over shoe choice. Merrill was saying, everyone's debating what shoes to wear, and Chris was telling us, he was like, I was debating whether to wear road shoes. I'm so glad I didn't now, because it got really muddy on the day itself. Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Yeah, it's really good how you can all use each other. And I guess, we learned a lot, didn't we, James, just from being there together and running the course and getting familiar with it. I think it really does benefit you in some way, learning from others or getting out there yourself. Are you planning to get out there, Chelsea? Because we'll be out there.
Yeah, definitely planning to get out there and make sure that I recce more of the course. I have run it once before when I was crewing someone for CCC, and I ran back from Champay along the course, which was quite cool because people thought that I was racing, but I wasn't, so people were cheering me on. But looking forward to getting out there and just getting to know it a little bit more, which would be great.
Brilliant.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, we don't need to say too much about how amazing OCC is, and that entire week in Chamonix is incredible. And all those little tips about where are these extra water troughs and where's there a waterfall where I can get some water over my head. And the aid station at Triumph was just carnage. And then there's a trough 10 meters away. You can just fill your bottle up. So all those little things. I know Chris is pretty dialed in with that stuff, and I'm sure Doug's very kind of into it as well. So you got some good knowledge there. Oh, that's exciting. So that will probably be, from a time point of view, the longest race you've ever run.
It will be, yeah.
Okay. So what's scary or exciting about that aspect of it? You touched on fueling and stuff. Obviously, that probably plays a pretty big part.
Yes.
Pacing as well, I'd imagine.
Yeah, pacing. I think pacing and hydration are going to be the things that are going to be really key for this, because it's always really hot. And I've worked really hard on sort of the nutrition side of things, and I'm starting to get that a little bit more dialed in. I think it will be also very different when it's really hot, because often you don't want to take on the gels and things. But I do struggle a bit more with the hydration side and remembering to drink enough. So working with Rebecca, who's our sports dietitian, to make sure that I'm practicing this in all my training sessions, so that when it comes to OCC, it's just normal. It's just what I do, and just making sure that I get that dialed in. But I think also like the sports psychology side of things as well, and making sure that I don't get too sort of taken up by the atmosphere and sort of exhaust myself by the excitement beforehand.
Yeah, there's so much data. Like when we started to dig into other people's Strava files, previous race results, previous times, I mean, that's one thing worth mentioning, which applies to like seemingly any trail race, regardless of what it is. But if you look at the results from 2-3 years ago and think that's what you're going to rock up and be competing against this year, you're sorely mistaken. It's like what you were saying about standing on those start lines, and the depth of fields were just getting ridiculous. We had the exact same experience coming to some of these European trail races, looking at results from 2 years ago and thinking, oh, I can podium there, and then turning up and being the 20th seed. Like, what has happened? Why is everyone else in the world here? But because with OCC, you know they're going to be there, and you know it's going to be insanely deep. Like I got my automatic qualification for it last year, and then turned up to go into the elite entry, and I wasn't even allowed to, because I was like the 70th rated male runner, and I had to just go in the regular way and queue, and it definitely is like an ego check of, okay, like this is another level. But even with all that being said, there's so much information there that you can learn from with the pacing and stuff, and with it being such a long race, and I think you guys coming at it from quite an intellectual point of view and the experience that you've had, the nice thing with it is you really can ease into it. Like the atmosphere is ridiculous, and it is amazing starting from Ossier and that first section of the race, but just like the layout of it, the first few K on the road, the nature of the climbing, it's nice and wide. There's just no rush, and we saw people going through that first aid station like absolute psychopaths and exploding. So, well, whatever. I mean, you know all this stuff, but I found it quite an easy race to sensibly pace the first couple of legs of, without getting carried away. So I'm sure you'll be fine.
That's really good to know. Thanks, Jim.
Was it really...
And then I DNF'd, so I mean, maybe I don't know what I'm talking about.
I was going to say, but that's an external factor. But the nutrition stuff's really interesting, particularly with the hydration, because I think you're right, Chelsea. You know, the last few years in particular have been super hot. Despite the year before, you know, the start of the week, they got wet weather warnings and they were in snow for the MCC. But by the end of the week, even the year before was super hot as well. So it is lending itself to be a hotter race. And I think, you know, history tells us now that you have to be prepared for a hotter race, plus the altitude, as you've already mentioned. And I was listening to a podcast not too long ago, and what I found really fascinating was I've always known about gut training and training the gut and how important that is, and always looked at it from the carbohydrate side and getting enough fueling. But then when I was listening to this podcast, what I found fascinating was they were talking about it from a hydration perspective as well, and how your gut does actually expand when you put more fluid in it. And if you've not been putting that fluid in, it will not tolerate the fluid that you want to put in on race day. And it sounds obvious when you say it out loud, doesn't it? But it was kind of mind-blowing to me to think, oh, I now know why all those stupid idiots at university used to be able to do that 4-pint challenge when they were doing it all the time, because they were training their gut to tolerate more fluid. But it's probably something you need to start thinking about now, even for the end of August.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that from like last year as well, I practiced in training too. So I'll be set to drink, you know, just go on an easy run carrying water, and every 10 minutes drinking like 100, 150 mils, and then sort of building that up. just so that, yeah, like you say, you're training your gut to be able to cope with carrying that water and running at the same time. And then, yeah, making that into sort of protocols for some of the harder sessions once you feel comfortable on the easier ones too.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. You know, people just try and put it in straight away on the intensity and actually get used to it first. Yeah, that's a really good tip.
Yeah, nice. Okay, awesome. So, I mean, in terms of like training building up now into the races that you've got scheduled for 2025, what are the major changes that you're putting in, or are there any major changes? Like, are you trying to find significantly more elevation? Is there a lot of like long treadmill efforts? Because you talked about obviously being in the UK, not
Yeah.
having access to really, well, the terrain is nothing like the terrain in Chamonix, obviously. So yeah, aside from those races that you're going to go and do, are you planning any other training trips? Are you getting up to the lakes or the peaks? Do you guys like meet up and do sessions or anything like that?
Yeah, so I'm hoping to put in some more trips, so sort of out to the Pyrenees or out to the Alps, just to get sort of more, to be able to get those big long climbs really, that you just can't get here. Even with going, up to Snowdonia, it's just not the same. You don't have sort of the 2,000 meter peaks, but just trying to get in the climbing legs. So there will also be some treadmill sessions and stepper sessions as well. I think
one of the got you on the stepper. Oh no.
I struggle. Like, I'm happy sort of on the terrain where I can continue to run uphill, that's all good. But when it gets really, really steep and then I'm having to power hike, that's where I struggle a little bit more. And I think in some ways I struggle maybe a bit more because I am very tall and I have very long legs, and that it's just a bit more challenging to sort of go into that motion. It's not very comfortable for me. But so trying to train that section a little bit more to keep my VAM nice and high, and just getting in those sessions. I think going out to sort of the Pyrenees again, or going out to the Alps and just getting some really specific climbing sessions in will really help. So I've already started plotting my next trip out, ideally with a work conference as well. So
love that. Yeah, well, why not make work your life as well? And then we do the same thing, right, James? We're always looking at how we can combine the three: work, lifestyle, and the running, so we can throw all of it in. Yeah. There's a couple of questions from me that I need to get in there, Chelsea. The first one is, you mentioned the word VAM there, which maybe our audience aren't familiar with. Can you kind of give a brief description of that term and why that's important in trail running, particularly for you when you're looking at improving your climbing speed?
Yeah, so it's basically looking at how much how fast you can climb in sort of a given 1,000. Well, it's how fast you can climb within 1,000 meters. So, for example, for me, I have just come out of a training block in Girona, so it was kind of a shortened one because I had a bit of an injury, but I then wanted to test how I was doing at the end of that. So I've on Monday had a session where I had to climb, it was about a 900 meter hill effort, and then we could see how my climbing speed was doing. And then we can compare it to, you can take up the data from Strava, from other runners who have placed well in the OCC, and see what their VAM scores were for different climbs, and compare it to how I was doing on Monday, and see sort of where I am in comparison to them, what I need to improve, and looking at it like that.
Yeah, it's good. I know Chris used gap pace a lot last year, didn't he? Similar principle. VAM, that vertical ascent rate, done, like you say, over 1,000 meters. It's a good way of comparing how fast people climb. We use a slightly different rate. We use a Munter rate. All same things. It's just done a little bit in a different way. My second question, before I hand back to James, is one Doug has tasked me with asking you, and I don't know where this answer's going, I'll be honest. So I'm going to ask it now in case we run over time-wise. But he said, you've got to ask Chelsea about Chelsea Tree.
Yes. Yeah.
So, explain.
Yeah. So there's a race series out in Girona called Classmark, and they ran a number of different races throughout the year. For the previous 2 years when I've been out in Girona, they've had Trail Rock Corba race. So I ran it in 2023, and then came third then and ran it in 2024 and came second. And the prize that year that you got given if you're in the top three was a tree, a little tiny tree. And obviously I was going back to the UK, so I couldn't take it with me. So I gave it to my coach, Doug, because he lives in the Pyrenees, and him and his wife have been taking great care of my Chels tree.
Well, that's very nice. You know what? That reminds me as well of another weird trophy that you've probably received, which is that fence post from the trail marathon. Have you put your fence post next to your tree? Or the strangest trophy cabinet ever?
Yeah, I've got two of them. They're like
they're massive. Yeah, I use it as a doorstop in my garage.
Yeah, they're pretty amazing. But I remember sort of finishing the race and then being given this, and then having to walk it all the way back to the car park, which was I think I parked my car about 10 minutes away, and it was like just struggling with the weight of this thing. But yeah, a really cool race prize at Trail Marathon Wales. But yeah, they're currently sat inside I haven't really worked out where I'm going to put them. I mean, it's been a couple of years since the first one, so they're just in my living room.
Nice. Yeah, I don't know that there is really anywhere for them. They're enormous. So
yeah, I think you need to mark your own trail in your garden somewhere.
It's like a trail marking post from the forest centre, isn't it? So yeah, I don't know. It's crazy, but cool. I mean, it's nice when races do unique little things. The tree as the trophy is really cool, because I know Classmark are huge on sustainability, and it's like a big part of what they do. So yeah, that's nice
to see it growing. It's amazing how much it's grown in 1 year. I was just out visiting them last week, so I got to see the tree. Can confirm it's still alive, so that's great.
Nice.
Awesome.
Continuity. I love it. Yeah.
Definitely. All right, awesome. Well, I mean, I think that's probably most of the stuff that we wanted to chat through. Sounds like you've got an amazing year lined up, and we're probably going to end up crossing paths 10 more times in between now and then. If you need a training race to get out to, either in the UK or in Europe, give us a shout if there's anything that lines up, because obviously we've got all of our run-through trail races now, so we'd be happy to have you along and see what you think. But yeah, that was, like I said, kind of the reason for being out in Girona the other week, is getting everything lined up for that, which is now looking really positive and moving quite nicely. We actually, I really wanted to come to Marathon de Mont Blanc this year, but our Pila event kind of clashes with it the same weekend, so I'll be just on the Italian side of Mont Blanc, but maybe we'll get a chance to come and watch some of the race. I'll definitely be watching the live stream aneway. But,
is yours the Sunday, Chelsea? I think it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is, yeah. So I'll be there actually. Yeah. So I'm over at a retreat in Morzine, which finishes on the Saturday. I've got a couple of athletes who are racing on the Saturday, which I'm not sure if I'll make it across for, but we'll be there for the Sunday, and then we're tagging on a bit of a training trip. So we'll be out there to support you on course, and we'll cheer you in the centre of Tammany. If you can hear us, of course, because the noise is usually pretty epic.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing coming back into the town. But
awesome. Yeah, it's so cool. It's such a cool race, and it's absolutely rapid at the start, isn't it? So you know what? Actually, our event's on the Friday night and the Saturday, so I will be there. So we'll come and see.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, amazing. But no, really appreciate your time, and it's been obviously great to meet you. Really excited to see how you get on this year, and also same for the rest of the team. I'm trying to. How many people have you got on the Elite Trail team now? I think I've only met you, Chris, and Hugh.
Gosh,
how big's the team in total?
Oh, he's putting her on the spot. You can't miss anyone.
Oh no, sorry, we can cut this bit out.
We're going to count everyone. But yeah, so there's Poppy, Meryl, Kirsty.
Oh no, Meryl. Okay.
Yeah, and I on the women's side. Oh, and Joanne. And then we've got Kathleen, Robert. We've got Hugh and Keith, Chris, and I'm definitely going to miss someone now.
There's a new guy, isn't there? Just
Joseph.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Joseph,
wow, so it's growing quite a bit then. That's great.
Yeah, so we had 2 new members this year. So we had Joseph and Julia as well.
Awesome.
But Keith and Hugh kind of class as one, don't they? Because every time I see them, they're together.
Races together.
Yeah, they just love crossing finish lines, holding hands.
Oh,
great.
yeah, I seen him again at the Arc, and I was like, God, every time I see you guys, you're together. Gemma even said, I'm not even sure which one's which.
I mean, ideal training partners, though, when you think about it from that point of view. If you're doing sessions together, you're pushing each other, and then you're pacing each other in races and running with your mate, especially for the longer stuff that those guys are doing. What a dream. Like, I would love to have someone...
as well. That really helps as well. So they can push each other, and, you know, one of them's better at descending, technical stuff, and yeah, they can help each other out, which is really cool.
Nice. Awesome. All right, amazing. Well, yeah, thanks again, Chelsea. It's been great having you on. I'm sure everyone will be really excited to follow the rest of 2025, and we wish you all the best. I'm sure it's going to be amazing. Lewis, have you got anything else you wanted to touch on, or are you happy there?
No, I've loved that. Yeah, really, really nice conversation, really positive conversation. And yeah, just wish you the best of luck for 2025, Chelsea. You and all the team, you know, follow the team's progress really closely. And I think the work Doug has done in particular is it's actually not underrated, 'cause it's starting to get real traction in the trail world, which is great to see. So yeah, I'll be looking out for you in the ETT in 2025. But yeah, it's been a pleasure having the conversation today. So thanks again for your time. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to chat with you guys. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you.
Great. Okay, perfect. We'll leave you to unpack all the stuff that you brought back from Girona and and let the dog out. And yeah, we'll keep in touch and we'll speak soon.
Brilliant. Thanks.
Cheers. See you guys. Bye.